Do you regret Jeff Doucette?
No.
No. Would you do it again?
Oh, yeah.
Television has always been a window into the world, but sometimes what slips through that screen is far darker than anyone ever intended. Take this first video, for example. On June 14th, 2008, a Japanese television station called Television Miyazaki was broadcasting a live game show segment from the remote rice fields of Takachihocho. The idea was simple. Two contestants stood back-to-back on a narrow wooden platform above a shallow pool of muddy water, and when given the signal, they had to push each other off, without turning to face their opponent. The winner was the one left standing. The loser got soaked and laughed at. It was messy, lighthearted, and exactly the kind of bizarre entertainment viewers expected on a Saturday afternoon. One of the early rounds went exactly as planned. A contestant was knocked off the platform and landed face first in the mud, completely coated in thick brown sludge. The crew laughed. The crowd loved it. It was silly, chaotic, and full of the exaggerated energy that made these kinds of shows so addictive. But then something happened that no one could have predicted. The remaining contestants began urging one of the show's hosts, Tetsuchi Yanagita, to join in on the fun. At first, he resisted, but eventually, he gave in. Tetsuchi stepped up onto the platform to face off against another player, and the crowd's excitement only grew louder. It felt like a spontaneous moment, one that would probably end in more laughter and another round of muddy chaos. But the second the match started, it became clear that Tetsuchi wasn't prepared. He lost his balance almost immediately. Without thinking, he dove headfirst off the platform and into the water below. What no one realized was that the pool beneath them was only 6 inches deep, and the rest was packed with dense, heavy mud. Tetsuchi's head struck the mud directly. The impact broke his neck instantly. In a matter of seconds, he went completely limp. From the neck down, he couldn't move. It was a terrible accident, one that should have stopped everything. But instead, it became the most disturbing part of the broadcast. Unaware of what had just happened, the crew assumed that Tetsuchi was joking. They laughed, pointed, and even began shoving his head further into the mud, splashing more sludge over him to mock his fall. What they didn't realize was that Tetsuchi wasn't moving because he couldn't. His neck was broken, his face was pressed into the mud, and in those few inches of water, he was drowning. For 15 long seconds, he fought for his life, completely paralyzed and unable to lift his head to breathe. Eventually, someone pulled his face out of the water. For a moment, it seemed like things might be okay, but then they dropped him again. Face first, right back into the mud. The laughter continued. No one noticed that something was wrong. No one realized they were watching a man slowly die on live television. It's one of the most painful things to witness, not just because of the injury, but because of how oblivious everyone around him was to the reality unfolding in front of them. Eventually, someone lifted Tetsuchi out of the mud, and the show quickly cut back to its regular programming. For viewers at home, the moment passed. But for Tetsuchi, everything had changed. By some miracle, he survived. Doctors later said that if he had been left in the mud for just a few seconds longer, he likely would have died. In the years that followed, Tetsuchi learned to live with his paralysis. According to his Facebook page, he even made an appearance on the show again, this time in a different role. It was a moment of resilience, but it didn't erase what happened that day. A live broadcast meant to entertain had come terrifyingly close to capturing a man's death, and for far too long, no one even noticed. If you thought this was shocking, just wait till you see the next one. Before Gary Plauché became known across America for committing one of the most shocking acts ever caught on live television, he was just an ordinary man, a father, a husband, living a quiet life in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. To understand what Gary did and why, it's important to understand who he was and what meant the most to him. Gary was the kind of person who worked hard, kept his head down, and made his family his top priority. He wasn't known for outbursts or dramatic behavior. In fact, he avoided conflict altogether. But if there was one thing Gary took pride in, it was being a father, especially to his son, Jody. Gary and Jody shared a close bond. They watched sports together, played outside, and shared quiet moments that only a father and son can truly understand. Gary tried to be a good role model. He wanted Jody to grow up with strong values, respect, kindness, self-control. He believed in raising his children with love and consistency. But no amount of love could have prepared him for what was about to happen. Like many parents, Gary thought karate would be a great way for his son to learn discipline and confidence. So he enrolled Jody in a local class. That's where Jody met Jeff Doucet, a young instructor who seemed to take his job seriously and quickly earned the trust of parents and students alike. Jeff became more than just a teacher. He started attending family dinners, joining outings, becoming a familiar face in the Plauché household. Gary believed his son was in safe hands. But Jeff Doucet wasn't who he seemed. Behind his calm demeanor was something darker, something predatory, and no one saw it. Not Gary, not the other parents, not even the children. Doucet's obsession with Jody grew slowly, and then all at once. On March 16, 1984, everything changed. Without warning or permission, Jeff picked Jody up and left Baton Rouge. He crossed state lines, vanishing without a trace. By the time anyone realized Jody was missing, they were already hundreds of miles away. For Gary, it was the beginning of a waking nightmare, the kind that makes your chest tighten and doesn't let go. The hours turned into days. Search efforts intensified. News of Jody's disappearance spread quickly, drawing sympathy and outrage from across Louisiana. But no matter how many people offered help, Gary remained trapped in the same suffocating question: where is my son? Eventually, the truth came to light. Doucet had taken Jody to a motel in California, and over the course of several horrific days, he abused him in ways no child should ever have to endure. When law enforcement finally tracked them down, they stormed the motel and brought Jody to safety. Doucet was arrested on the spot. For a brief moment, there was relief. Jody was alive. But Gary knew that the trauma wouldn't end just because his son was home. Jody would carry those wounds for the rest of his life. And Gary couldn't accept the idea of Doucet sitting comfortably in a courtroom, awaiting a trial. The thought of that man pleading, testifying, possibly even walking free one day, it was more than he could bear. Exactly 1 month after the abduction, on March 16, 1984, Jeff Doucet was being flown back to Baton Rouge to face charges. The local news was there to cover it. Cameras rolled as he was escorted through the airport by detectives. Gary was waiting nearby, positioned by a row of public payphones. He wore a baseball cap and held a small handgun in his right hand. As Doucette walked past, flanked by law enforcement, Gary stepped forward and fired a single shot. The bullet hit Doucette in the head, and he collapsed instantly. The entire incident was captured live on television. Viewers at home saw it happen in real time. And then, in the silence that followed, a voice was heard shouting, "Why, Gary? Why?" Gary didn't resist arrest. He didn't run or fight. He calmly handed himself over to police and answered their questions without hesitation. He showed no remorse, no anger, just resolve. To him, it was simple. He did what any father would do. Public reaction was split. Many were horrified. But others, especially parents, understood. They saw a man pushed to his breaking point. Someone who had watched his child suffer in a way no child ever should. For those people, Gary's actions weren't just understandable, they were justified. In court, Gary was charged with second-degree murder, but his legal team fought hard, arguing that he was not a violent man, just a grieving father consumed by pain. In the end, the court accepted a plea bargain. The charge was reduced to manslaughter, and Gary received a sentence of 5 years probation with no jail time. The decision shocked the nation. Some called it mercy, others called it dangerous. But for Gary, it didn't matter. His son was safe, and justice, at least in his eyes, had been served. Years later, in a rare interview at the age of 67, Gary was asked if he regretted what he had done. He didn't hesitate. He said he would do it all over again, without question, without apology.
Do you regret killing Jeff Doucette?
No.
No. Would you do it again?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yes.
It's sad to see how life can change in an instant, and this next video proves that once again.
In fact, I shouldn't even kid. This is very serious. This is no magic trick like you've been seeing here tonight.
On Halloween night in 1990, a magician named Joe Burris, better known by his stage name, The Amazing Joe, stepped into the spotlight with the intention of doing something no one had ever done before. He wasn't just there to entertain. He was there to take a risk, a deadly one, and everyone was watching. Joe Burris wasn't your average illusionist. He saw himself as a daredevil, a stuntman, a man who believed that real magic wasn't just about misdirection or sleight of hand. It was about danger, about doing something so impossible, so terrifying, that audiences would remember it forever. His hero was Harry Houdini, and there was one trick even Houdini had never conquered: being buried alive. That failure haunted the history of magic. But for Joe, it was an opportunity. He didn't just want to attempt the buried alive stunt. He wanted to take it one step further. Instead of being buried under dirt alone, Joe added 7 tons of cement to the challenge, roughly 14,000 pounds of crushing pressure. If he could escape from that, he believed his name would be etched in the history books beside Houdini himself. This was supposed to be the pinnacle of his career. The setting wasn't glamorous. It wasn't a Las Vegas stage or a nationally televised spectacle. It was Blackbeard's Family Fun Center, a modest amusement park in Fresno, California. Still, it had a crowd. Cameras were ready. The excitement in the air was real. The stage had been set to resemble an actual burial site. A clear acrylic coffin lay at the center, surrounded by mounds of dirt and buckets of cement, ready to be poured. Joe wanted the audience to see everything, even his struggle. The transparency was part of the drama. He was wrapped in heavy chains and slowly lowered into the coffin. Spectators watched in silence as he gave one last nod before the lid was sealed shut. Then came the first shovels of dirt. The show had begun. From the outside, everything appeared to be going according to plan. The dirt fell, the cement followed, and the suspense continued to build. But underneath the surface, inside that coffin, something was wrong. Joe's stunt depended entirely on timing, and more importantly, on the strength of the acrylic coffin. But as the weight increased, so did the pressure on the coffin walls. And then, without warning, everything collapsed. The coffin gave way under the unimaginable weight of the cement. In an instant, the clear walls shattered, and the ground buckled. Joe Burris, still chained and trapped, was crushed before anyone even realized what had happened. The collapse was silent, sudden. At first, no one in the audience moved. Some thought it was part of the show. They waited for a hand to burst through the surface, for the coffin lid to crack open, for the magician to rise from the grave. But nothing happened. Seconds passed, then minutes. There was no movement, no signal. And then came the realization. This wasn't part of the act. One of Joe's crew members rushed toward the site, breaking the tension and triggering panic among the staff. Stagehands grabbed shovels. They dug as fast as they could. The camera crews kept filming, unsure whether to cut away or keep recording. But by then, it was already too late. The weight had done its damage the moment the coffin broke. Joe hadn't been given even a second to react. Unlike Houdini, whose attempt had ended in failure, but not death, Joe had no air pocket, no wiggle room, no chance. By the time rescuers reached his body, Joe Burris was completely still. The camera feed finally went dark. The crowd, once buzzing with anticipation, stood in stunned silence. What was meant to be the most incredible escape in modern magic became one of the most horrifying moments ever witnessed in a live performance. A man who dreamed of being remembered alongside Houdini had succeeded, but not in the way he had hoped. Did you find this unsettling? Then brace yourself for what you're about to see next. It started out like any other day in the world of daytime television. Viewers were tuning into a familiar mix of soap operas, infomercials, and the ever-popular genre of highly scripted courtroom shows. One of the more beloved programs at the time was Christina's Court, a show that mixed light legal disputes with personality-driven drama. It had a simple formula. Judge Christina Perez offered counsel and rulings on small claims cases, all while maintaining a calm, charismatic presence that kept her audience engaged.
Today in Christina's Court.
On this particular morning, the show featured a case that was more humorous than serious. Comedian Sean Harris had filed suit against his ex-girlfriend, hoping to recoup unpaid rent from their time living together.
Every month it would be something different, you know?
Like what?
I ain't got it this month because I got to do this or that. And I'm like, man.
So you let her go 9 months without paying?
As was often the case with Christina's Court, there was a sense that much of what happened was at least partially scripted. But Sean's natural charisma and quick wit gave the episode a fresh energy. He was clearly comfortable in front of the cameras, and the episode quickly turned into one of the show's more iconic installments. What made it especially memorable, however, was not the case itself, but what happened right at the end, in a moment that appeared to go completely off script.
Constantly like a child in my
People
own
in
house.
love, they yell at each other all the time.
Oh, that's true. Ask him, he's been married for how long?
Over 27 years.
Over 27
Look at him though,
years.
he look mad. You don't look happy, brother. You don't look happy.
As the hearing wrapped up, Sean shifted his attention to the show's bailiff, a man named Renard Spivey. Renard had been a regular on Christina's Court for years. He wasn't just the bailiff. He was a recognizable fixture on the show, known for his stoic presence and occasional dry humor. But in this moment, he became the punchline. Sean made a playful jab, suggesting that Renard looked visibly disappointed when the topic of his 27-year-long marriage came up. The audience laughed. Renard smiled awkwardly. It was the kind of joke that seemed harmless. And for most people watching at home, it was.
He's very happy. Okay, all right, let's get back to the claim.
The exchange was light, even charming. It was a rare unscripted moment that gave a glimpse of the real personalities behind the courtroom characters. but no one could have known just how close to the truth that offhand joke would turn out to be.
Still developing tonight, a Harris County Sheriff's deputy facing serious charges. 63-year-old Renard Spivey accused of killing his wife, 52-year-old Patricia Spivey, after an argument that turned deadly. KPRC Channel 2's Bill Barajas.
On July 28, 2019, more than a decade after that episode aired, Renard Spivey was involved in a violent domestic dispute with his wife, Patricia. The argument, according to investigators, began over suspicions of steroid use or possible infidelity. The details of the fight remain unclear, but the ending was tragically simple. Renard retrieved a firearm, shot Patricia once in the arm, and then again in the chest. She died in their home, her body later found crumpled inside their bedroom closet. For years, he had stood beside Judge Cristina Perez, enforcing order in a courtroom that was never truly real. But now, his life had crossed into very real criminal territory. Today, Renard Spivey sits alone in a prison cell. He was sentenced to 14 years for the murder of his wife, the same woman he had once seemed so proudly married to. That one lighthearted joke, made years earlier on national television, has now become one of the darkest and most hauntingly ironic moments in the history of daytime TV. What was once just an episode of scripted courtroom drama now serves as a chilling reminder of how easily reality can shatter even the most carefully constructed image. And that can also be said about the following footage you're about to witness. On January 11, 2001, one of Brazil's most beloved television figures stepped onto the stage in a familiar setting. Xuxa Meneghel, known simply as Xuxa, was a national icon. A model, actress, singer, and host whose shows had entertained generations of children. That day, she entered the set of Xuxa Park, riding in her signature spaceship prop, ready to deliver another colorful, high-energy performance. The show had been a staple of Brazilian television since its debut in 1994. Produced by Rede Globo, Xuxa Park was a fast-paced blend of games, dance numbers, animated segments, and musical performances. Everything about it, from the futuristic set design to Xuxa's vibrant presence, was built to keep children engaged, laughing, and singing along. By 2001, the show had been running for nearly 7 years, with no sign of stopping. On that particular day, nearly 300 children filled the studio audience. They were there to play games, ride attractions, and take part in the usual fun. The show progressed just like any other. Segments came and went. Songs were sung. Dancers twirled across the bright stage. By the time the episode neared its finale, the entire crew gathered on stage for one last musical number. It was meant to end the day with a bang. Unfortunately, that's exactly what happened. This single frame, captured just over a minute later, reveals what the set looked like in the aftermath. The bright, whimsical playground that millions of children knew so well had been reduced to a blackened ruin. Flames had torn through the set so quickly that the studio lights hadn't even dimmed before the cameras began capturing the chaos. In the background, smoke rose thick into the air. The once colorful props were now twisted, smoldering wreckage. And yet, the broadcast kept rolling, at least for a few moments longer. The fire began in an instant. As Xuxa stepped away from the spaceship to close the show, a small spark ignited behind her. The dancers continued their routine, unaware that something had gone terribly wrong just feet away. A member of the staff ran into frame with a fire extinguisher, trying to smother the flames, but it was already too late. Within seconds, the fire exploded into a roaring blaze, engulfing the spaceship prop and swallowing the surrounding set in a wall of fire. Panic broke out almost immediately. Children screamed. Crew members rushed toward the exits. But the danger didn't stop at the stage. Just beside the fire, barely outside the camera's view, was the show's iconic Ferris wheel, which children were still riding at that exact moment. One boy, trapped in a seat, was stuck in place as the fire inched closer. Those around him noticed and sprang into action. A small group of brave adults fought their way through the smoke and heat, eventually reaching the boy and pulling him from the ride. On the far left edge of the screen, they can just barely be seen carrying him to safety. In the hours that followed, the fire was traced back to an electrical malfunction, specifically a short circuit in one of the stage vehicles. The damage was total. The set was reduced to ash and steel. Zucha Park, once a symbol of joy and celebration, was gone. Amazingly, despite the sheer speed of the fire and the number of people inside the building, there were no reported deaths. Several suffered burns and minor injuries, but every child and staff member made it out alive. The only fatality that day was the show itself. Zucha Park was canceled almost immediately, never to return. The episode was never re-aired. What was meant to be a joyful broadcast became a historic tragedy in the world of live television. And although everyone survived, the footage remains one of the most haunting reminders of how quickly joy can turn to fear, and how sometimes all we can do is watch. But what if it doesn't happen right in front of the camera, but behind it? Let's watch it unfold in the next video. When investigators began digging through the online conversations between Ronald Brown and his associate Michael Arnett, they were horrified by what they uncovered. These weren't just inappropriate exchanges. They were depraved, graphic, and saturated with obsessive fantasies, not only about abducting and killing children, but about consuming them. Most of the messages were so vile, they could never be shown publicly, even as part of a criminal trial. This wasn't a passing curiosity. It was a deep, personal obsession. Brown had even singled out a specific child from his own church, someone he saw regularly, someone whose family trusted him. He wrote about this boy in grotesque detail, describing how the child would make a perfect Easter meal. He fantasized about ending the boy's life and eating his flesh. And this wasn't just dark talk hidden behind the anonymity of a screen. Ronald Brown had begun putting his plan into motion. He photographed the child from a distance and even edited one of the images by drawing black lines across it, mapping out how he intended to butcher him. These conversations were encouraged by Michael Arnett, who claimed he had already done what Ronald was only dreaming of. Arnett even sent an image, one that haunts those who've seen it, showing a 2-year-old girl positioned inside a pot in an oven. But the nightmare didn't end there. When investigators searched Brown's online identity, they discovered an account under the username UELime on a disturbing website known as cutedeadguys.net, a forum dedicated to the fetishization of human corpses. In a post on that site, Brown admitted openly that he had been aroused by the sight of deceased boys since his youth. And sadly, that wasn't just a sick fantasy. When police raided his home, they found over 200 files containing child sexual abuse material. That number didn't even include hundreds more photos. images of abused children, children tied up, and children who appeared to be dead. In a sock drawer, officers discovered a blow-up doll dressed in little boy's clothing. Alongside it, another hard drive, this one even worse. It contained thousands of additional images, including a flyer for a missing child. And among the many folders, investigators found hundreds of pictures of a boy named Andrew, a child who had attended Brown's church youth group before dying of a brain tumor. Ronald had obsessively documented the boy's physical decline, collecting images right up to Andrew's funeral.
You know, Ron, you have to invite Jesus Christ to come into your heart and ask Him to forgive you of your sin.
When confronted with the evidence, Ronald Brown confessed. He admitted that he did, in fact, want to kidnap and eat the boy from his church, along with many others. Yet in the same breath, he claimed he never would have followed through. He said it was all a fantasy, a role play. But even today, that statement is hotly debated. There may be no direct evidence that Brown physically harmed a child, but everything about his digital footprint, his collection of images, and the detailed plans he laid out suggest that it was only a matter of time. He wasn't just thinking about it, he was preparing for it. In 2014, Ronald Brown was sentenced to 20 years in federal prison, but he wouldn't serve the full term. He died behind bars in 2020, quietly and without ever fully accounting for the darkness he'd harbored for decades. The public unraveling of Ronald Brown's life didn't just expose a predator. It destroyed something that many people once held dear. Joy Junction, the children's show Brown had co-hosted with puppets and moral lessons, was beloved by kids across the country. But after his arrest, the tone of the show changed permanently. Every clip, every smile, every lesson, all of it now viewed through the lens of what was happening behind the scenes. What made the situation even more disturbing was a final discovery during the raid. In one of the drawers, police found a set of handwritten journals. Ronald had been writing in them every day, pages upon pages, obsessively cataloging the boys he encountered, his thoughts and his cravings. In chilling detail, he described his desire to kill, to consume, and to understand what a child tasted like. These journals, to the best of public knowledge, have never been released. But one detail is especially haunting. The first entry was dated 1978. Joy Junction premiered the very next year. The implication was hard to ignore. Ronald Brown's darkest desires weren't just a recent development. They had been festering since long before his appearance on national television, meaning that many of the children featured on the show were likely the very same ones he was fantasizing about. That realization forced every person involved with Joy Junction to sever ties completely. The show was effectively erased from history, living on only in memory and in one man's crimes.
Ron, they were looking at some dirty pictures and they wanted me to look too. As your companions, you should have friends who have pure and clean thoughts and will only give you good ideas.
From the moment investigators traced a single water bottle to Ronald's home computer, Joy Junction's fate was sealed. And so was his. The cheerful, faith-based program was forever tainted, not because of what it taught, but because of who was teaching it. Ronald Brown had brought the entire production down with him. Yet even now, the full impact of the investigation continues to unfold. The raid on Michael Arnett's home didn't just expose one predator. It revealed a sprawling network. Hundreds of others were involved. Some have since been arrested. Others are still awaiting trial. In one of the most terrifying cases, a man was discovered building an underground torture chamber, complete with restraints, soundproof walls, and tools, meant for use on his first victim. He had planned to share it with Michael. These weren't just fantasies. These were active, evolving plans. But one small miracle did emerge from the horror. The little girl photographed in Arnett's oven, the one many feared was long gone, was found alive. She was rescued. And while the full scope of Michael and Ronald's crimes may never be fully known, one thing is clear. Had they not been caught when they were, it's very likely they would have acted on every horrific thing they'd imagined. Joy Junction had once aimed to teach children right from wrong, but in the end, its legacy became a cautionary tale. A chilling example of how even the most wholesome messages can hide the darkest truths when the wrong person is chosen to deliver them. That's all for today, folks. If you want to see more of this creepy content, click on the video on screen.